Super.
G'day, I'm Rob. And I'm Tim from Invivo. And we've got big news. We've just taken over one of New Zealand's most historic wineries. Let's go and have a look. Our new winery has 114 years of history and a whole heap of stories.
It was set up in 1902 by the New Zealand government and was originally run by a famous industry pioneer, Romeo Brigado. He was an innovative man, way ahead of his time, and had a fantastic moustache. Now we've got the keys to the place, we need to ramp up its production to match our growing volumes in export markets and in New Zealand. But we still plan to respect this awesome history and embrace it as part of our company. Through our research, we found that Romeo sent wine samples made right here to London for a show in 1908, where we believe the first gold medal for New Zealand wine was won. This tradition of innovation and winning medals is something that we at Invivo plan to continue right here. We're also going to crank up this bottling line to produce over 12,000 bottles a day.
Tim, if we've given any more support, we're going to need all that capacity to deliver on our plans for Invivo and an insanely popular grade Norton Sauvignon Blanc.
Well, I'd say cheers to that. Cheers, thank you.
So cheers, and here's to hell of a future.
Oh.
G'day, I'm Rob. And
Lovely. Over to you, Rob.
Please turn it off. That's enough. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's always a little bit cringy watching yourself on video. Yeah, so I suppose we'll start off by just telling you a little bit about, hey, Mimi, hey, nice to see you. It's a shame we can't be doing this in person, obviously, but thanks everybody for jumping on. Averys and Invivo have a pretty special relationship, I think. You guys are one of our oldest customers. Back in 2009, I think it was, we just started the company. I suppose I'll start from the beginning. So myself, I'm a winemaker. I was lucky enough to spend quite a few years in Europe making wine in some interesting places. I started my career making wine in Slovenia, and then lived in Bordeaux for a while, and then I moved to Cyprus, made some wine there, and then based in London for a consultancy firm. Looked after projects in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Moldova, and quite a few other countries as well. So, you know, as a young winemaker, it was a really interesting experience to sort of move away from, you know, New Zealand wine, which was, you know, come from a very clean, very stainless steel, very sort of contemporary, modern, sort of scientific, I suppose, approach to Europe, which was completely the opposite, especially some of the older parts in Europe. I remember being blown away. My very first job, my first trip to Europe in Slovenia, the winery was founded in the year 750, and there was continuous families that had worked in that cellar since then. And, you know, it really blew my mind that New Zealand was only discovered 150, 160 years ago, sort of populated then. So, you know, quite a contrast. And those sort of years making wine in Europe really formed my kind of view of wine. And I think it's kind of given me a bit of a different perspective of, you know, how wine is made and grown and part of people's life. And that's what I loved about Europe. It was such an ingrained part of the landscape and the culture. And, you know, New Zealand wine history is so young. I mean, we're really only 40, 50 years at that. And, you know, we're very practical about the way we make wine. We're very passionate. But it's just a slightly different approach from Europe. So when I got together with Tim, an old friend of mine from school, we're both living in London, he was in marketing, and we're both sort of thinking about coming back to New Zealand, wondering what we were going to do. And so we sort of got together and started chatting about the opportunity to create a wine company, a wine brand. And obviously quite different from Europe. In New Zealand, we're a lot more flexible. We can work with farmers, with growers. We didn't have to own the vineyards. We didn't have to own the winery. So that was sort of the beginning of Invivo. And the name Invivo means in life, in the living, in the now. And that sort of, I think, was certainly come from working and living in many parts of rural Europe and just loving the fact that people would get together and celebrate the harvest and the food and the wine. And, you know, for me personally, I'm sure all of you will agree, you're certainly happiest with a glass of something in front of you and some good food and good friends and family around you, really. I mean, that's what life's about. So it's very much, you know, true to what Invivo is and how we've grown our business and where we are today. So for a young wine company, we just had our 13th, I think, vintage, so pretty young. Although looking at that video, I was certainly a bit younger back then, had a bit more hair. But, you know, we're really excited. We've come a long, long way from 2008. I remember vividly 2008, a very tough year. It was when the kind of global financial crisis hit. We just sort of mortgaged our houses to start this business and had these grandiose business plans that we'd spent 6 months to write and research, and we thought we did everything properly and correctly and planned. And, you know, when it came down to it, you know, I think we pretty much blew through all our money in the first 6 months and we're on the bones of our rear end. So it was a really, really tough time. And, you know, it was sort of the peak of Marlborough's height of demand, and grape prices were astronomically high. They were a third higher 12 years ago than they are now. And it's taken 10 years to recover back to where they were. And it was just a function of massive global demand for Sauvignon Blanc. And so it made our wine very expensive to make. And then we thought we could sell it for high prices. But with the global financial crisis and a huge vintage in 2008, our prices had to halve. So we had to sort of do a fair bit of deep sort of do. And the reality is we just had to keep hustling and keep working. And that's what we did. We got a little bit of government assistance in 2008 that helped us travel, which was important. So, you know, we sold our first pallet to Australia in 2008. That was a big win. Our second sale ever was to Lithuania, believe it or not. And then we started shipping a little bit into the UK. And it was a funny connection with Averys, was that Tim's father had a second cousin in Dunedin. You can see Dunedin on the map there. And said, oh, I think so-and-so's son works for a wine company in Bristol. And so sure enough, Tim never met this chap, Aaron, who we're still good friends with now. And sure enough, Aaron Rice was working for Mimi and the team. And I remember one very sunny day, we took the train trip down to Bristol from London with our samples, not knowing what was going to happen. And I vividly remember that meeting still, Mimi. It was sort of one of the highlights for our company, as we walked into this very intimidating, big professional wine buying organization with masters of wine and people training to be masters of wine, and you know, a couple of traveling salesmen pretty much with their backpacks on their back more or less, and you know, a couple of bottles of wine to sell. And we tasted, it was a hot day, and we had all of you guys in the tasting room, I think, and the wine just tasted, it was one of those days where Sauvignon Blanc looked really, really good. And I love those days, they're fantastic. And just the wine went down so well. And I think you placed an order for a container that minute. And at that time, that was pretty much game changing. That pretty much, I think that first container order was so important. I think it kept us going for the next 6 months. So, and from then, I mean, it's just been a wonderful, you know, fun and successful relationship that we've grown, and we still hold very dear to this day. And, you know, we sell a whole range of our wines to Averys, and Averys customers have been extraordinarily loyal, which we really love. And you can see we've got the especially selected for Averys wine up there on the screen. That's been a great success over the years, I think. It's a lot of fun to make. Well, I guess what I like about working with Averys is now our business has grown a great deal, and you know, wine has become, you know, big volumes now, and it can lose a little bit of its luster of kind of authenticity, where the grapes come from, the trials, the tribulations in the vineyard of the vintage, you know, during the process. And I just feel like the wines we sell to Averys, it's sort of a good opportunity to celebrate that kind of process and the land a little bit more, and that the Averys customer kind of, I have a feeling that the Averys customer wants to buy something that you know, they want to see the people in the wine. And I feel like that's kind of what we do with you guys. And I think it shows, and it still does. And it's always fun for us to, you know, send the new vintage to you guys to get your feedback, and, you know, especially the things like the Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris. We don't make very much of that, and you guys are good customers for those wines. And, you know, I like to think that the Averys customers really enjoying our wines, and it's just a nice kind of a little bit of a closer relationship that we have with our consumer. It's not supermarket stuff or anything like that. I mean, that's all good business, but this is kind of what we get into wine for, essentially, is this kind of relationship with our customer. So,
Well,
yeah.
I've got a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I was just wondering, how would you describe the difference between your usual Invivo Sauvignon Blanc and our Averys selected one? Is it different sites, different plots, or different method within the winery? How do you feel they change?
So, I mean, it does vary a touch with the vintage, but generally speaking, the Averys selected wine is more Wairau focused. And generally the Invivo Sauvignon Blanc is a little bit more Awatere Valley focused. So for those of you not familiar with Marlborough, it's basically two rivers, essentially. One big one in the north and one small one slightly in the south. There's a mountain range in between. And it's that geography and geology that makes Marlborough the best place in the world to grow Sauvignon Blanc. So the key things to take away here is, if you imagine a giant river and glaciers millions of years ago that have basically carved their way down from the head of a large mountain range to the sea, left a big flat land of alluvial soils. So they're very rich in minerals and stone and varying aggregate, you know, rocks. And then you've got the temperature variation between the day and the night, because it's just right by the sea there. We get very, very hot days and very, very cold nights, and that's absolutely critical for any aromatic wine, and Sauvignon Blanc particularly. So what that does is it means that the plant can absorb and accumulate warmth and sunshine during the day. At night it photosynthesizes and creates sugar, but because it's cool at night, some of those more delicate aromatic compounds are not destroyed. So, you know, that sounds simple, but there's not many places in the world that have that unique combination of the soils and the weather to match Marlborough. And so the Averys is certainly more Wairau focused, so that's the Northern Valley, and that's probably a bit more on the traditional side of, you know, what you'd expect from a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. So a little bit more herbal, but really full in the mouth, nice structure. The Awatere Valley in the south is it's a little bit cooler there. The soils are quite different, and you often get more kind of high acidity. It can be tropical, can be green, a little bit more. I describe the Wairau as the elder child, and the Awatere Valley as the little shit. I think is probably the best way to do it. A little bit of a rascal, can be unpredictable, doesn't play by the rules. Whereas the Wairau is a little bit older, a little bit more sensible, but still has great character. I'm thinking of my children actually at the moment. So yeah.
I was just going to say, we've got a few more questions that have popped up in the chat actually. The first one that came in was, if you could collaborate with any celebrity, whether past or present, to make a wine, who would it be?
Oh goodness. That's a really hard one.
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Well, I mean, I put my personal hat on. I'd have to be a musician because I'm a really keen lover of music. So, geez, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. That'd be fun. Just to be in the same room with that guy would be pretty cool. But Jimi Hendrix, I mean, come on, probably Jimmy. I don't think we'd talk a lot about wine, but it'd be fun.
A lot of wine would be drunk.
Shall I tell a story about how we got introduced to Graham? Or
yes,
that
please.
story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously it's a very big part of our business, is the Graham Norton collaboration. And so I suppose off the back of selling to Averys in the first sales in sort of 2008, 2009, we sort of found out that that's one of our main vineyards in the Altree Valley there, that picture. That's the West Haven vineyard, quite a stunning block. So we found out that Graham Norton was a big fan of Averys Sauvignon Blanc, and that's what he drank on the show. And so we thought, well, there's an opportunity there. So Tim, being the marketing guru, hustler that he is, got a hold of the production company, Graham's production company, and pestered them to find out whether we could supply the show a case of wine and get Graham to taste it. And we thought, well, if we could get the people on the show to drink our wine and maybe put a bottle in a bag, get a goodie bag or something like that. We didn't really know how it worked. We thought, well, that's got to be great exposure, and surely that only can be good. So eventually they said, yeah, sure, send us a case. And so this was back in 2009 or 10, I think it was. And so we sent them a case of wine, and then we, rang them, couldn't get hold of them. Eventually they came back and they said, yeah, Graham really liked the wine. And then we said, well, look, we'll supply you all your wine for all your shows for free. And they said, fantastic. We normally go down to Tesco and buy the cheapest, nastiest crap that we can find because we're TV and we're cheap. So that was quite amusing, because we figured, they were buying expensive stuff for these celebrities, but no, they were buying, £5, £6 red wine and white wine for them. So, our Averys Sauvignon Blanc was a real step up. And then because we were traveling up there so much, and we started this relationship with the production company, they said, well, come along to a show one night and introduce you to Graham. So we're, of course, blown away by this. So we went up to a show, we met Graham, what a lovely chap, really passionate about his wine, really loved our wine. And so we sort of started that relationship. And then, every time we went up to the UK, we'd go to a show, we'd catch up with him. And then, we sort of said, look, to the production team, would you mind if we kind of marketed ourselves as the official wine supplier to the Graham Norton show? And they kind of ummed and ahed a little bit. And then and they said, well, you can do it in New Zealand. That'll be fine. Little old New Zealand, nobody knows what happens down there. So we did, and we got such massive noise here from the media and the press, because the Graham Norton show is one of the highest rated shows still in New Zealand. So he's very popular here. So we thought, wow, there's a great opportunity here. So next time we saw him was 2012 or 13, and we said, look, this has got legs. Do you think we could do something, make a wine with you? And he said, well, I want to work with you guys. You're good guys. Get creative. I can't come to New Zealand. I've got to be careful around the BBC, but see if you can work around that and come up with something. So we put our thinking caps on. I think it was 2014. We made a little video, picking the grapes, rushing them into a cooler, jumping in a helicopter that we bribed for a case of wine to take us up and down, but made a cool looking video like we're sort of high rollers. And then filming us going up to the UK and knocking on the door of the set of the Graham Norton show with our grapes harvested 24 hours earlier from Marlborough. And then we had a little bucket for Graham. It was during rehearsal of one of the shows. So Tim's up there with his own little film crew, amongst the big professional film crew, all looking very, very unhappy with us. And so Graham's squashing these grapes and we're filming it, and then we press this juice and we fill up a couple of bottles. Tim brings it back, and then we put those bottles into a couple of our big tanks of wine, and then we came out with the fun, Graham Norton's own Sauvignon Blanc. And it was a bit of fun, we got a huge amount of press. And we just did a relatively small run, 14,000 bottles, something like that. And it was sold out really, really fast. And we thought, wow, we've got something. We've got the tiger by the tail here. What can we do to kind of make it a bit more legitimate? I mean, it was a couple of bottles and 10,000 litres of wine. It was nothing. So we thought, well, why don't we get Graham a bit more involved in the process? And this is kind of where the fun is people find wine often quite intimidating because they love the taste of it, but the language is something that's not familiar. And I think most people feel like this, and the wine industry's done a great job of making that language kind of a little bit hard to kind of tap into. So we sat Graham down with our wines and started blending with him. And the fun part about blending is that you don't really need to learn the language. You find your own language when you're in that process. And Graham loved it so much. And he created his own style of wine, and anybody can do it. That's the beauty of it. So of course, I'm guiding him through the process, and the wines that we put up there in the first place are within a spectrum. From there, we made his first blend in 2015. I think it's over 3 million bottles this year. So it's been a huge success. And we've extended the range, of course, to Rosé and Shiraz and Prosecco and gin, of all things, as well. So it's been a huge amount of fun and continues to be every year. So each year we do a new blend with Graham, and he's getting phenomenally good. He's got a great palate, and they're seriously good wines.
I actually used to work for another UK wine company, I won't name here, but I was working for them when the Graham Norton Sauvignon was launched, and I just remember how incredibly popular it is. And Invivo wine sold half of it, and Graham Norton, his name and his brand just really, thank you for making my job easy, essentially, because all I had to do was name drop him and people just went absolutely crazy for it. I remember it being such a big success straight from the get-go, really.
We still name drop all the time at our events, so.
Yeah, we do.
Stop telling everybody that blending wine's easy.
Well, it is easy when the base wine is extremely good, Mimi.
Of course. Okay.
It's a fun process to do, and I highly recommend it if you ever get the chance, because you don't have to be an expert, and you don't have to be an expert to understand when you've created something that's good. Let me rephrase. So when you're sloshing stuff around, when it's bad. But there's that light bulb moment when, yes, we've got it, we've tweaked it just right, and that's the magic. So I suppose on the back of that success, not being content with a few million bottles, we wanted to add a few more. We thought, well, why don't we do the same thing in the US with a US celebrity that hopefully matched Graham's passion and excitement for it. And I think that part of the reason why the GN one is successful is because, wine is about people, right? It's about people, it's about stories. When you're buying a wine, you want to know a little bit about where it's come from, usually, most people do. And I think it's the fun factor. The Graham thing is the fun factor. He's a fun guy, he's universally loved. The wines are good, they deliver what you want in your Sauvignon Blanc and Rosé, your Shiraz. But there's a little bit of cheeky fun about it, and I think that's why it's so successful. Last year we had a similar process, but a little bit different, a bit more high end, a bit more glamorous with Sarah Jessica Parker. But we're very lucky again that she is just an absolute treat to work with. She's just so lovely. Again, very passionate about the wine, and just excited with the process. And so that's also going extremely well. So quite a different style of wine, the Sarah Jessica Parker Sauvignon. But from a winemaking side of things, that makes life really interesting, because I've got to make the base wines. It allows me, I suppose, to push the boundaries of what a winemaker might do, because I'm not the one at the end of the day making the decision of what the style is. It's these people. So I'm there as the sort of the support act there, but it allows me to work a little bit more free when it's not kind of my name on the bottle in some ways, if that sort of makes sense. But it certainly means we get to make a lot of different styles of wine in the winery, and that makes it a lot of fun.
Thanks, Rob. Could you talk us through the Pinot Gris that people have in their glass?
Pinot Gris, I should try it, actually. So I've just had coffee, have a glass of wine now, I suppose.
Never too early then, Rob.
No, it's a bit professional, friend. So this is the Pinot Gris. This is from, if you're looking at the map there, it's from the far eastern side of the red bit in Marlborough, from that little point there, that's sort of just close to the end. So Marlborough being a valley, the further up the valley you go and further up the river, the cooler the temperature, the larger the gravel, the larger the stones. And the further down you go, because you imagine it's had a lot more weather and gets exposed more, you get more, the soil gets heavier and the stones get fewer. And so it becomes more heavier soil, more sandy. And so this is from quite heavy, sandy soils down there in Rarangi. It's always been quite a textural vineyard for Pinot Gris. This year we got some quite nice aromatics from it. I suppose the balance, but the style we're trying to go for is not too sweet, keep the alcohol not too high. Pinot Gris from New Zealand can tend to end up being quite high in alcohol. We didn't really want that. Overall, we want our wines to be drinkable, enjoyable, fun. It's got a nice sort of spicy pear. I always sort of think of Pinot Gris, that pear, kind of nashi pear type character. For some reason, I always think it goes quite well with sushi and sashimi. When we travel to Japan, when you're having good sushi and sashimi, obviously drinking sake, I think there is something, I'll probably get shot for saying this, but there's something about Pinot Gris that reminds me, I think it's the plumminess, the kind of peary plumminess of sake and Pinot Gris. For some reason, I always sort of think there's a connection there. So great with that. The other thing in my travels, making wine in Bulgaria, what they drink with their salads, phenomenal salads, if anyone's been to Bulgaria, tomatoes and peppers and things, they drink rakia, which is from the skins of the grapes, the spirit, and that's got a kind of almost a Pinot Gris type character there. So it works really well with things like feta and Greek salads and that sort of thing. I see a question there about Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, Pinot Gris. Mimi probably answer this better. I always think it's the same grape, it's just kind of what you call it.
Mimi, have you got any thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I think it can be. There are within all grape varieties, you've got the different sort of clones and things. But as far as I know, with Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio, it is the same wine with a different name depending on where you're making it, and it's a little bit like Syrah Shiraz. Depending on nowadays, depending on the style you're making it, you'll call it one or the other.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you've also made an interesting point about the clones. So for people that are not aware of how, I always find it interesting to sort of describe grape varieties. So if you think of the grapevine as a tomato plant, right, and then how many different types of tomatoes can you think of? Well, I mean, it's a bit like that with grapevines. There's different, you can have Pinot Noir and you can have 20 different clones of Pinot Noir, and they're all vastly different. And it's the same for all varieties. And so especially in older parts of Europe, like Pinot Grigio, Friuli, up the northern part of Italy, genetically, I've no idea what those Pinot Gris vines or Pinot Grigio vines actually are these days. They might be so different from what we in New Zealand grow as Pinot Gris. Yeah, there's a huge variation there. So, yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I always tend to explain it as Gris being the kind of the French way of spelling it tends to mean it's more similar, it's more kind of ripe stone fruit flavors, a little bit more similar to the Alsace if you're kind of comparing that, using that as a base. And then with Grigio being the Italian spelling, often it's kind of lighter styles that maybe a little bit fresher, more citrus kind of focused, and very dry, essentially. Just while I've got you, Rob, there's another question we've had, and you might not have seen, in terms of climate change. Now, it's kind of a hot topic we get asked about quite a lot, but in terms of climate change, is it having any impact on your yields, or do you see it having an impact on your yields in the future? And are you having to make any adaptations to cope, or, have you got things in place for the future?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I find it's a hard one to answer with any true degree of accuracy, I believe, but because, I mean, I've only been making wine in Marlborough for 12 years, which is, in terms of climate, that's still quite a short period of time. However, I think we are changing. The climate is warming up a touch. The yields, well, I mean, warmer climate's only going to increase yields. So, I mean, that's a part of the magic of Marlborough. We can produce quite large crops, really good quality, because of the kind of the natural statistics of the land. So, we're still very much a cyclical region. New Zealand is very cyclical. The La Nina and El Nino weather patterns have a huge impact on how our harvests go. So, you know, El Nino can be droughts, and La Nina can be storms and more rain. So the last sort of 5 years, I think we've had kind of a much drier time. We could do with rain. That's not to say that it might change again. I think it's getting easier to grow grapes further north in New Zealand. Having had a family vineyard in Northland where we had a lot of rain and storms, it's getting drier up there. Yeah, I think on the whole, it's probably not affecting the wine in a negative way. Perhaps with New Zealand geography, we have the ability to move north or south to adjust for temperature. I think Central Otago, which we bring our Pinot Noir from, it's hard to say whether that's warming up anymore. But I suppose in a warm year from Central Otago, the Sauvignon Blanc tastes amazing. I've seen a question there. Where did the name Invivo come from? So Tim and I were sitting on a balcony in West Kensington, flicking through magazines, trying to find a name, come up with ideas for a name. And I don't know how, I saw something, caught my eye. Being from a science background, in vitro means that, you know, from glass, in vivo, from life, in life. I thought, well, that sounded pretty cool. And then we sort of thought, yeah, that sort of sums up what we're about. And so, yeah, sure enough. And we didn't want to be a lake, a river, a hill, anything, you know, too Kiwi and obvious like that. That's not our story. We wanted to be something a bit different. So, yeah.
Are you experimenting with any new grape varieties at the moment? Anything that we should look out for on the horizon?
We're doing Chardonnay a bit more now, which is fun. Personally love Chardonnay, I love making Chardonnay. We don't have anything new variety-wise in the back pocket at the moment, but basically, if I ever come across anything interesting like a Riesling or Gewürz, we tend to buy it and make it. And as much for the winemakers to have fun as for actually sales, but yeah. We're looking at a few other things in other countries, but that's another story.
Is that something that you're not allowed to discuss right now?
I'll get in trouble.
Okay. I know New Zealand's quite big on sustainability when it comes to winemaking. Is there anything that you feel that you do slightly different to other countries?
Well, we're lucky that the sustainable approach is kind of, it's baseline. So, you know, everybody we work with is, you know, already doing everything possible to make it sustainable. We'll say an interesting comment on organics. We've got one grower that has a couple of vineyards that are organic, and you know, I always find it interesting that when the years get a bit challenging in terms of weather, if it's too cold, the organic vineyards almost always ripen to their full extent, whereas other vineyards would struggle in years where we have a lot of rain and there's a lot of disease pressure, and there's a lot more disease in Marlborough than there used to be. That might be linked to climate change, warmer temperatures. And so when there's disease pressure, the organic vineyards stand up to that pressure better than anyone else. And it's a really interesting kind of observation over quite a few years now. So I think a good organic operator produces healthier, kind of more robust vines and obviously wines from that. So, you know, we take the sustainable very seriously. It's a big part of New Zealand wine's, you know, core brand values. So, yeah.
Is it true that all New Zealand wine has screw cap? There's no corks anymore?
No, it's not entirely true. Not entirely true. No, there's some people that have cork. It's just become I suppose, a bit easier now and simpler to use screw caps. But there's not to say that corks can be just as good. Cork quality has improved a great deal over the years. I think you guys would agree. I mean, probably the 80s and 90s were, for New Zealand, cork we were receiving was very poor quality. And so we're having a great deal of issues, you know, up to 7-8% of your production could have been corked. So if you think about that, that's a huge amount of wine and a huge amount of missed opportunities to give your customer a good experience. And so after a while, that risk becomes a bit untenable. But that said, cork has improved a great deal. So, you know, you could happily go back to cork without any issues, I think, personally.
Just in reference to the 80s and 90s when oaky Chardonnay was a big thing, and that's obviously kind of fallen out of fashion slightly. Somebody's asked whether you think, you know, New Zealand Sauvignon will fall out of favour, and, you know, in terms of what New Zealand produces, do you think there'll be more of a switch towards perhaps, I mean, from my perspective, I'd love to see more sparkling wine coming from New Zealand. What do you think might be New Zealand's next best export if Sauvignon does fall out of favour, perhaps? Not that I want it to, but, you know.
Yeah, it's a question we get asked quite a bit, and we sort of assess it from a business risk sort of thing regularly. I don't see it changing, to be honest. I don't see it falling out of fashion, and here's why. When people want a glass of wine, particularly in warm climates, they want something that's fresh, that's crisp, that's fruity, it's aromatic. Sauvignon Blanc does that better than anyone else, any other variety. So I just think it ticks so many boxes that, you know, if it does fall out of fashion, it'll be a gradual thing. What else does New Zealand do well? New Zealand does lots of things well. Chardonnay, absolutely stunning. We make great Chardonnay. It's undervalued in my view. But yeah, I mean, we could do Chardonnay on a grand scale at really high quality. So I always think that could work. Sparkling, 100% right, really great sparkling. But we're just not famous for it. And I suppose the cost side of things, there's an economic piece that probably would keep it reasonably limited.
There's another question that's come in as well on, you know, the impact that coronavirus and COVID has had, whether it's on your kind of ability to make and distribute wine this year, whether had any impact, because obviously Southern Hemisphere harvests would have been more affected perhaps than in the Northern Hemisphere, and in terms of distribution and kind of shipping. Have you seen an impact, and have you been able to negate it in any way?
It was very frightening times. I was in I was in the pub with my mates kind of 3 or 4 days before harvest. I was about to go down to Marlborough the next day, and you know, the COVID hype was building momentum, and someone in the group said, "I've just heard it firsthand that we're being shut down, locked down tomorrow." And you know, I think we all recall the first kind of eve of that. I mean, and you guys, we really feel for you, still struggling with it, but I just remember getting on the phone at the pub saying, "Harvest everything, pull everything in now." Didn't matter if it was ripe or not. We all genuinely thought that the government was going to stop the harvest because everyone had to be locked down. So for 2 or 3 weeks, it was extraordinarily stressful. But thankfully, our wine industry, you know, worked together so collaboratively and so efficiently to comply with all of the, you know, the regimens that we needed to do to keep everybody safe. So I'm really proud of our industry and our country for doing that. And so, you know, once things settled down, yeah, it wasn't easy. We had to, you know, lock everybody. It made life a lot more difficult, but really we're just grateful that we could get our harvest in. So yeah, it was challenging for sure. The rest of the year, as you probably aware, New Zealand's been very fortunate and by good management as well, that we're in a good position in terms of COVID. That's not to say we haven't had other lockdowns, and you know, for a few weeks there, I couldn't actually get to the winery because there was roadblocks on the motorway for me to travel outside of the region. But I mean, our whole team, whole company's just pulled together and done an extraordinary job in doing what's needed to be done to get wine out the door. And demand has been very strong. So, you know, overall, we're very blessed and we're very thankful for having a comparatively good year to some people.
Yeah, I think in terms of the increase in demand that we're all very aware of at Averys, obviously there's an increase in people consuming wine at home rather than perhaps in bars and restaurants, which definitely has driven part of our surge and responsible lockdown drinking, shall we say. In terms of your winery and the way you kind of ship wine to the UK, somebody's asked, do you ship your wines in bulk or are they exported in bottle?
We do a bit of both. So it just depends. For all of the wine going to Averys is all bottled in New Zealand. And it comes down to practicality and cost, to be honest. No, so we do a little bit of both, just depending on the brand.
You don't feel it has any effect on quality at all?
No, it doesn't. It's incredibly, it's actually better, sustainably better for the environment because you're shipping over in bulk, and one bulk container is probably the same as 5 normal containers. So it saves a lot of space and it's just more efficient generally. And the quality of the wine is, there's no problem at all. Very, very good systems nowadays for transporting wine in bulk.
Lovely. I was just wondering if anybody else has got any more questions for Rob.
Well, just Mum and I visited in 2016, and I got told at the time, whatever you do, do not put it on social media that you visited our new winery because we're not announcing it to anyone until next Friday. So I went around and we were looking at it, but you had a beautiful pot still.
Yes, we still do. So, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's protected by the government. So for those who don't know, we moved into one of the oldest wineries in New Zealand about four years ago. It was a research winery built in 1902. So for New Zealand, that's like really old. It was kind of quite a cool piece of history that we sort of moved into. It was where the New Zealand government was really smart. They brought over this chap named Romeo Brigato from Italy, who was a winemaking expert, and they planted him at our winery. And then they said, look, travel all through New Zealand, write the blueprint for where our wine industry could grow, and make your experiments at this winery. So this guy back in early 1900s, he identified Marlborough would be a good place to grow Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling and Pinot Gris. And he identified that Central Otago could be very good for Pinot Noir. Hawke's Bay could be good for Chardonnay. So this guy, we're basically living in this, making our wine in this building that has such huge historical significance. So yeah, Mimi, I think we were just about to move in 2016. And so obviously being a research winery for many, many years, there wasn't commercial, so they weren't selling any wine. And so the winery became full of all of this old wine. And then World War II came along, and they thought, well, why don't we distill the wine and then we can send the alcohol to the war effort for medicinal purposes. So we've got a giant pot still that goes up 4 stories. It's quite something to behold. It's quite a cool piece of history that we're very proud of and show off whenever we can.
Something I'm quite interested in is the fact that partially crowdfunded and kind of pioneers in that approach to kind of investment in your winery. Do you think that's changed your kind of customer base or the way that you've grown in New Zealand and further afield?
Yeah, so in 2015, the company had grown to a point where we needed to put some more capital in there to help support the further growth that we had planned. So it was very new to New Zealand at the time, and we took a lot of leads from the UK because crowdfunding had been around for a while there. And so, yeah, it was a really great success. We raised $2 million in less than a week. And we ended up, now we've got over 600 shareholders. And I mean, look, it's fantastic. We've got 600 very engaged shareholders that just love being part of our journey and support us hugely. And they're out in the community, knocking on the local wine shop saying, why haven't you got my wine in there? And it's great. It's been a great kind of step for the company, and we're really proud and enjoy having those guys on board.
Excellent. So another question there is, who's the biggest export market? I know the UK is a huge importer of New Zealand wine. I think it's at some points all we drink. Is it the same for you? Do you import the majority to us, or is it now the US as well?
No, the UK and Ireland is still our biggest market. So you imagine the Grey and Autumn range in Ireland goes quite well, goes extremely well, and also in the UK as well. So yeah, UK, Ireland is our biggest, probably followed by USA/New Zealand, something like that. So, you know, wines have grown popularity in New Zealand too, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people are always surprised. Often when we host tastings, we host a quiz and we ask people to list kind of the top 10 wine producing countries in the world. And at the moment, New Zealand's sitting around kind of 12th or 13th. But if you were to visit any supermarket in the UK, you wouldn't be blamed for thinking that New Zealand was about number 2 or 3 at the moment. I think we import kind of vast amounts of what is produced and then leave the rest of the world and yourselves to share what's left.
Yeah, we're grateful for it. Thanks. Keep it up. Keep doing it.
Super stuff. So yeah, if there's any other questions, please fire them at Rob now. Of course, if there's anything that you haven't had a chance to ask or mention, then again, do feel free to email events@averys.com, and we can always pass them on and answer afterwards. I would like to say a massive thanks to Rob for joining in and partaking, for waking up nice and early, and also for not being too tired from winning more awards. Mimi said you mentioned you won even more wine awards the other day, so congratulations on that as well. What awards were they for?
That's our extraordinary marketing team, of which I can see Rachel's part of. She's on the panel here. Big shout out to the Averys. I can see up there. Thanks for joining. Should be very proud of Rachel for being part of the world's best marketing team, bar none, I think is our catchphrase. Yeah. But no, thank you guys very much. It's been a lot of fun. And thank you again for your support, Mimi, Louise, and Frank. And thank you to all you guys out there for enjoying our wines, and hopefully we'll see you outside of COVID soon. Thank you very much.
And just for those of you who have enjoyed it, you'll be glad to know that both of the latest vintages of the Pinot Gris and the Averys Select Sauvignon Blanc are on the water and will be with us very, very soon. So if you would like to purchase any of them in time for Christmas, again, email events@averys.com. But yes. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mimi. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We're going to leave you in peace and let you slowly enjoy the rest of your wines. Of course, do feel free to join us again tomorrow. So tomorrow we have Melon Chablis tasting the Village 2018 and the Premier Cru 2015, which is also going to be exceptional. And then we've got Jeff Correll from the Languedoc in the south of France, tasting the Morillon Blanc and the Darons, 2 fantastic southern French wines. So feel free to join us for that as well, and for Friday and Saturday as well. Yes, we may not be able to do the normal celebration of wine, but we can certainly make it virtual and still get everyone nice and involved. So
I thought you were going to say nice and drunk then, but we can still get everyone enjoying wine together. That's the main thing.
Thanks for filling in the blanks there. But yes, thank you very much, everyone. Do take care and see you all hopefully tomorrow. But yeah, good night, everyone. Take care and farewell.
Cheers.